In this lesson, we're going to continue setting up our rocket fire simulation that will later be used for our procedural copying. So in the last lesson, you remember we set up our emitter for our rocket fire, so let's go ahead and get this simulation set up. And turn off the visualization of these two for right now. So I'm going to drop down a new DOPS network. I'm going to call this Rocket Fire Sim. And let's dive inside. So to do our simulation, we're going to need a few objects. We're going to need a smoke object, a source volume, a pyro solver, and a gas resize fluid dynamic. Going to want to plug the smoke object into the first input for object, our source volume to the last input for sourcing, and our gas resize into the velocity update so it updates as the simulation goes on. Since we are doing a pyro simulation, let's just call our smoke object pyro for right now. So let's go over to the smoke object. If you remember earlier, we made that bounds object in our emitter, and we're going to use that bound object to drive the size and center of our smoke object initialization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, do edit parameter interface to create a new custom parameter. I'm going to create a string parameter. I'm going to click right here and then hit this arrow right here, and that's going to create the string parameter right below these two size and center parameters. And I'm going to call it bounds and label it bounds. Hit apply and hit accept. Now you see we have this custom string parameter right here called bounds. I'm going to set that to the obj rocket fire emitter bounds object. You see it highlights in orange, which means that's a valid entry. Now to get the reference of the size of this bounds object into the size and center of our smoke object, I'm going to go ahead and use this expression called bbox. The way bbox works, so you do bbox, you want it to the first input to be the bbox it's referencing. So in this case, I'm going to use a string channel reference to our bounds, which is going to get the path to our bounds object over in our rocket fire emitter. And this bbox expression knows how to read this expression dx size, and that's going to tell it to set this channel to the x size of our bounds, which is right here. Let's go ahead and do this for y and z. So copy paste and do dy size, and then also do dz size. And now you see our size is updated accordingly. Now we're also going to want to get the center. This expression we're going to use centroid. Again, we're going to get the bounds. For centroid we can just put 0, which references the x. 1, which references the y, and 2, which references the z. Now since we put our sphere at the center, you're not going to see much of a difference here, but if our emitter was located somewhere else, like way up here, the center would have updated accordingly. Now let's go back over to our source volume. The first thing we're going to want to do is change this from source smoke to source fuel, because we are doing pyro and our emitter is set to give us fields for fuel. And we're going to want to set this to the rocket fire emitter out. So let's go ahead and see what we've got right here. As you see, we have some volume filling up this cube. Now the cube is not expanding because we did not set our gas resize fluid dynamic. Let's go up here, set this to fire. I like to have my field track heat rather than density, so it's based off the flames, not the density. And the max bounds, we want to turn the clamp to maximum off so the bounds can update. And now you can see we have our simulation going and our bounds is now updating. Now right now we can only see density, and we want to be able to visualize a full pyro simulation. So to do that, we can go back over to our pyro object. Just going to go a few frames down so that we can actually see something here. In our pyro object, you see right now we just have the visualization set to density. I'm going to turn that off, and instead of density I'm going to use multi-field so I can visualize all the fields that are being created in our pyro simulation. So under the multi-field tab, first I'm going to just turn the bounding box hash on. In our smoke field, I'm going to want to set that to density. And now you see we have something pretty similar to what we had earlier when we were just displaying density. I'm also going to want the diffuse field, which is the color of our smoke, also set to density. And now you see we have this dark gray smoke. Under the emission field, we're going to want our emission set to heat. And we're going to want to multiply this by some amount, maybe something like 5. As you see, now we can see our heat field. Now this isn't too particularly interesting because it's very bright and white, and that's because we don't have our color set. We're going to have our emission color field set to temperature. And I'm going to map this out a little bit more so we have more range to use from this emission color ramp. And now you see we can actually see our heat field visualized much more nicely. It looks a lot more like fire. Now I should mention the settings that are now in our smoke object are probably pretty good for any pyro simulation you ever do. So one thing you could do is you can come up here and do save preset. And you can save it to a preset that you can later load up in another session in case you wanted to do something where you had your bounds object all set up with the right parameters and you had your multi-field visualization all set up. So you could type this in and do it something like pyro smoke object. Now I've already gone ahead and made a preset, so you see right here I have this preset, pyro preset. So if I were to do this again, I would just use this pyro preset rather than set this all up. But since we already have it set up, let's just leave that alone for now. So we have our simulation going, and it's not too particularly interesting. We just kind of have this jet of fire moving in the Y direction. So let's make some changes to our pyro solver so we can make this look a little bit more like rocket fire. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come in here and change our cooling rate to cool extremely fast. And what this is going to do is this is going to cut off how high those flames are getting. And immediately now we have something that's a lot closer to what rocket fire would look like, because we just want to kind of get the fire element. And we do want it to move kind of fast, so let's set this to a buoyancy lift of 10. That's going to move it up a little bit quicker. So it's still kind of blobby, so let's go in here and change the shape up a little bit. We want this, again, to still dissipate pretty fast. And let's put a lot of disturbance and a lot of turbulence in here. And immediately you see we're getting a lot more noisiness going on. Now our turbulence is probably a little bit too high. The first thing is the swirl size is way too much. If I were to visualize this turbulence, you see we have these really big swirls, and since we have such a small rocket fire, we don't need swirls that big. So let's change this to something much smaller, like 0.025. And now if we play this, see we have much smaller swirls, and if I turn this visualization off, our fire is a little bit more reasonable. Now you may notice that our fire is not really moving completely in the Y direction. It's spreading out a little bit, and one reason for that is because in our emitter we didn't really add any velocity earlier. So let's go back up to our emitter and fix that real quick. So in our fluid source, let's go over to the velocity volume, and let's add some velocity. We're going to add some Y velocity, about 2. And just to give it a little bit breakup, we're going to add some curl noise. Again, similar to what we had with the turbulence, our swirl size is probably way too big by default. Let's set that to 0.1, and let's bring down the scale by a little bit so that what's really forcing the velocity here is this 2 and not so much the curl noise. That should work for now. So let me come back over here, and to give that velocity a little bit more influence, I'm going to go ahead and change the scale velocity to 2. I'm also going to increase the temperature to 2, so areas of it's a little bit hotter, and that will move our volume a little quicker. So I've hit play. Now you see we have this nice flame that's really being forced up in that Y direction. And we got some interesting shapes, some interesting breakup, and this should probably work for the purposes of our rocket fire. So that's how we set up our rocket fire simulation. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how to write this simulation out, and then we're going to start setting up the explosion simulation.